Hello, everyone. This is Sadhana Alangar, HL7's Director of Education. Welcome to this discussion on leveraging FHIR for ONC certification program. Our speakers are Swanand Prabhutindolkar and Viet Nguyen. Swanand is the Senior Vice President and Proficiency Business Lead at CitiusTech. He has over 20 years of experience in information technology and currently leads CitiusTech's data management proficiency. Viet Nguyen has over 15 years of experience in health IT focused on interoperability standards and product development. He's the founder of Stratometrics, an HL7 board member, technical director of the Da Vinci project, and a renowned FHIR educator. At this time, I'm going to hand over the program to Viet. Hi, Viet.
Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for joining us today in this presentation. We hope it will be very informative and will also maybe stir some questions for you and to help spur your activities related to FHIR. We have a handful of objectives for today's webinar. We want to highlight the importance of the 21st Century Cures Act and its implementation by CMS and ONC through the final rules. We'll provide you some details around the Cures certification and some timelines, as well as the impact on you in the healthcare community and particularly the vendors. We'll also highlight, if you haven't already kind of come to this realization that some of us have, about the value of FHIR and its role in our healthcare IT and healthcare system, even beyond these certifications. And then we'll talk about how FHIR and this drive to promote interoperability is really going to promote innovation in our community and really help to improve healthcare for our community. So next slide, please. So first off, we'll be talking a little bit about this journey to FHIR to kind of level set and talk a little bit about its growing importance. So I'll hand it off to Swanand to give you this overview.
Thanks, Viet, and thanks, everybody. Good morning, this is Swanand here, and I'll be talking about the journey of the FHIR that we have seen so far. And as an opening slide here, here is an overview. So by now, we all know what FHIR standard is in some way or the other. And it has been introduced to overcome some of the challenges that were faced in the earlier standards. By no means I am saying that the earlier standards were bad, but it's just that the world is moving, the technology here is moving, and FHIR standards have been introduced to keep us in line with the technology that has been moving. So some of those are like packet-based data communications instead of API calls. Another one is granular access. So what do I mean by granular access? So earlier, if we needed to get let's say HbA1c value of a patient from his or her health system, then we would get it in the form of ADT or ORU if they were using HSN version 2, or it could be a CCD document if they are on version 3. But granular access that FHIR allows is to query the observation record itself for the patient and get rid of all the other items. So people who know HSNV version 2 would realize that, okay, I'm only talking about OBX segment coming in, and then all the other baggage, MSH and PID, T1, everything goes off. Another thing is another focus area that has been, FHIR also talks about the storage data model, which was in some ways missing in the earlier one. So it talks about storage data model, and what has happened is many technology companies around that we see, they have been talking about FHIR data repository. You probably would have heard this word coming up in some discussion or the another. People are talking about having a separate FHIR data repository, keep it there, maybe store it like a document database and things like that, and use it for your APIs. There have been third-party enablers like Smart and Smart on FHIR and Happy frameworks, and it's actually making life much easier for you to develop apps for your own niche area if you have any. If you have use cases to calculate things like the risk and maybe give some clinical decision support suggestions or so, you can write an app and make it available to consumers using FHIR, and that is something we believe is one of the real strong point of it. Having said that, there are a few challenges that we have seen for FHIR adoption. And when I say we have seen, it's not just CitiusTech or VHS1, but in some ways we have seen as a whole community. It's been around for some time, and we will talk about the timelines. But some of the challenges that we felt are like, first is just the entry barrier. Any standard faces, correct? HL7 v2.x has been around for quite some time. There's tons of data is getting moved using that standard. It's going to be difficult to just replace it in one single swoop. It has to, or it will happen over a period of time. Another thing is, though FHIR exchange offers ways to exchange data, ways to exchange images and things like that, but there have been some of the other competing standards around, like DICOM Wave or so, which offers similar benefit, and that could be another one that we have seen. Another thing that we have seen is it has been taken up as more of a API-based data exchange standard, and some of the aspects like authentication, authorization, they were not really part of the standard earlier. So I could use my way of authentication, and Viet could use his way of authentication. In fact, the rule that we are looking at, CMS and ONC, they have actually made it clear that authentication authorization will be done using OAuth2 standards, but that has come in as a part of the rule and not really as part of the FHIR standard. So anyway, now the life is really easy, and everybody knows that we have to use which rule, but earlier it wasn't, and that was one of the challenge to get onto the FHIR bandwagon. Though FHIR talks about data model as well, we believe it will be difficult for healthcare technology organizations to change the data model, and hence the mapping effort, because now you have to expose your data using FHIR to external world, and you would be having your own databases. Some of them would be EDW, some of them would be data lakes. And what you have to do a fair amount of mapping exercise, and that is another thing we feel is an entry barrier for FHIR adoption. But yeah, having said all of this, let's take a look at what are the significant developments happening in the healthcare world that are pushing for FHIR adoption. So can we go to the next slide, Atmik? Okay, let's look at some of these significant developments that are happening here and that are fueling FHIR adoption. So while there were various consortiums, industry efforts, and alliances being made, we believe the regulatory push that came in the form of ONC and CMS ruling probably takes the place for being the most significant one, because the moment there is a regulatory push, then everybody starts complying to it, and that is the push that was probably missing. And the moment that came in, FHIR adoption has fueled like anything. There have been sizable efforts from cloud vendors and other IT giants as well, like Microsoft and Google. They are coming up with their own PaaS offerings for FHIR APIs and repository and storage and whatnot. And they're making life a little bit more easy. If I have to create my own FHIR APIs, I have to host my FHIR server on cloud. These APIs are making life a lot more easy. And actually, that is one of the reasons, correct, which we believe that the adoption rate is increasing. Otherwise, I have to write all the technology, all the code. I can take help from an existing API structure or existing API framework, and just to do my job that I have to do. The next ones are the industry alliances like SMART and DaVinci and Argonaut and Karen Alliance. They are working on standardizing use cases, not only use cases, they are in fact coming up with the implementable profiles that can be used for data exchange. For instance, DaVinci has defined profiles for provider data exchange. Karen Alliance has defined profiles for claims data exchange. HL7 themselves have defined profiles for clinical data exchange in the form of US CDI, so on and so forth. So it's not just that you have to go to base FHIR and start thinking, okay, now what do I do? How do I start exchanging ones? I have to, can I drop certain things? Can I make certain things mandatory, and so on and so forth? But these profiles, that are come up by these alliances, they're actually making life easy, and they're telling us, okay, like a go-to profile for what type of data that you want to go for. And if I, as an app developer, wanted to take a decision earlier, it was really difficult, correct? Because we had DS2.2, DS2.3, DS2.4, and with this new release, that is R4, and that has been made mandated by the rule. I, as a developer, I'm now clear that I have to use V4 and I have to use this profile and making my life easy to go for it. So earlier it would have been everybody thinks in their own world and everybody goes for maybe a different sort of a profile, maybe going for a lot of customizations, but that has been kind of taken care of, and we will see a lot more adoption to R4. And probably to make a bold statement, correct, it may become in some ways de facto data action standard between healthcare organizations in a near future, if not far too off. Can you go to the next slide? Uh, so these are some of the use cases that we think technology companies will find useful. And in fact, towards the end, we'll be looking at one or two use cases in a little bit more detail. So I will not be sticking to a specific order out here, but we feel since it is more API based, and I thought that to have a real-time connectivity can be used a lot in IoT kind of a framework. So home health monitoring, there are many people, not many, in fact, almost everybody nowadays wears wearable devices to get data from IoT to a central place, then push it to EMR using FHIR. That could be one of the real nice use case that we are thinking. The most essential factor here is a real-time connectivity in terms of sending alerts or querying the piece of information right when you need it. The most popular representation for FHIR is JSON, and though XML is supported too, but still JSON we believe is the most popular one. But JSON also makes it lucrative to run AI ML algorithms on top of it. The database side of the technology enablers have good support for JSON format, and we believe it will be leveraged a lot more to make most of it. Now that FHIR R4 has federal mandate and adoption, we say pretty much it's on cards that in the next 2 years or so it will give future scalability. So we don't have to now worry about which version do I go for. I now know my roadmap for next almost 2 years, and that actually gives me the confidence that to have the kind of roadmap that I need to go for. Medical imaging world can think of many use cases in terms of augmenting patients' clinical data to image metadata in real time. And in fact, this is one of the use cases that we'll be discussing towards the end of today's event. We'll be taking one case study and see how medical imaging world can be benefited by using file data exchange in real time. And at the last, we feel that the most important one would be to having smart on FHIR apps. We already have a good deal of smart on FHIR apps around, but there could be a lot of new use cases coming up in terms of optimizing workflows and having clinical decision support apps and having risk calculators and so on and so forth. There is a connected on topic, in fact, that is dedicated for CDS hooks, and it will be interesting to see how that pans out in future. But I believe care coordination and smart on FHIR apps for using real-time alerts and all could be the use cases of the future. But having said that, I'll now hand it over to Viet to go over the next section. So Viet, over to you.
Thank you very much. Those are great examples of a small number of opportunities with FHIR going into the future. I think FHIR will do to healthcare what the kind of standardizations in travel and fintech have done in spurring innovation. So we look forward to seeing some of the additional opportunities in the future. So our next section in our webinar will be around the 21st century cures and the final rules. But before I jump into this, we have a brief poll to ask you all about what you think are some of your challenges around the rules as you've read them. So I'll ask Sadhana to please initiate that poll question. So what is your biggest concern about the new rules? So please select one, and we'll give you a minute or so to select it. as we're waiting for folks to submit their responses, just wanted to highlight some of those use cases. Just the ability to share structured, codified information using FHIR. There are really a lot of opportunities, especially since you're getting the data in the same form from all these different sources. And for those unfamiliar with FHIR, we'll highlight some of the classes of data that'll be standardized today in FHIR and in the future in FHIR through these ONC rules. So it looks like things have slowed down.
Yeah, you can probably take up the poll answers.
Okay. So in our responses, the top two at 26 and 24% were around information blocking and the scope of applicability. Oh, sorry. And then 34% was the top for conditions and maintenance of certifications, with the only 1% around the modules. 15% were around the FHIR API. I imagine that may be from some unfamiliarity around FHIR and still getting up to speed on FHIR. So hopefully this webinar, along with others provided by HL7, will be able to help you jumpstart your FHIR development activities. So let's go ahead and jump into the 21st Century Cures section of our webinar. Thank you. So really, broadly, the rules have a number of goals. As I've mentioned, and Swanand has mentioned, we really want to boost innovation by giving patients and providers secure and safe, of course, access to healthcare information that can then be leveraged to do other activities, whether it be to improve population health, engage patients in their own care, any number of activities, including streamlining the delivery of care. We want to help reduce the burden of interoperability. We know it's challenging to connect different systems when you're developing products, but really FHIR becomes that lingua franca and the exchange mechanisms to help reduce that burden. And of course, we want to really promote patient access to their own healthcare data and having them become an active participant in their care. So that's going to be achieved through allowing patients having access and control of their data, allowing them to get timely and precise data about their care. And for the patients, of course, but also for providers in care, we work in trying to help improve that exchange of data so the providers have a fuller view of the patient's health, even if they might not be the ones delivering that. We also want to decrease information blocking that has been a limitation in sharing data. We want to improve the transparency of how health IT products are priced and information is exchanged so that we can also, again, spur innovation and then promote kind of global interoperability. I know the pandemic has really highlighted the importance of that. And then this innovation promoting competition so that it's not about hanging on to the data, but it's about the value that vendors can create by enhancing the data and what can be done with it to help improve care. So next slide, please. So there are a handful of key clauses within the ONC Cures rule. One is to help with deregulation and improve the ability for health IT vendors to promote their products and share information. We have a number of changes to the certification criteria that we'll be highlighting in some additional slides. There are provisions around information blocking and penalties around information blocking, as well as a number of conditions or exceptions that would need to be documented and demonstrated by actors if they feel that they can't or shouldn't or may cause harm from sharing information. There will be a number of conditions for certification, for establishing certification, as well as maintaining certification. And then ONC is promoting the idea of advancing health IT along the entire care continuum, not just inpatient care or primary care providers, but also other providers of care, especially specialty clinics. So next slide, please. So we have a number of certification due dates coming up regarding these rules and compliance for these rules. The first one we see here coming up is in the beginning of November, and ONC has announced their discretionary enforcement for 3 months regarding these compliance deadlines. So it was a recognition that this rule was initially published at the beginning of March, right at the beginning of the recognition of the pandemic more worldwide, and that healthcare providers and their vendor support have been really focused appropriately on the COVID and caring for patients with COVID. And so these timelines haven't been changed, but the discretionary enforcement gives vendors and providers a little more time to comply with the rules. We do think that there may be some additional guidance being released in the near future, though we have no specific timeline for that. So we'll want to keep an eye out for that. So next slide. Next slide, please. Okay. So I'll hand it over here to Swanan to talk a little bit about the role of the rules and how they affect our medical IT technology.
Okay, so this is more from a technologist point of view. So, and the key challenges that we have been seeing today, interoperability itself and right now also it is correct one of the biggest challenge. There have been multiple methods in terms of changing data. It's like AI tools like Mirth and Rhapsodies of the world have been around. There are places where somebody exposes a web service and somebody says, okay, send me data on this FTP site and I'll take it, and so on and so forth. And everybody will send different kind of data in different format and whatnot. We all have seen that, and no standard data sets was one more reason that the challenges were just multiplied. With this rule that is coming in, what we feel is FHIR-4 is going to become, as I said earlier, correct, probably de facto standard. And if that really happens, then that gives us the minimum guarantee in terms of, yes, USCDI will be standardized for clinical data, Karen format will be used for claims data. And everybody knows that this is the way I'm going to exchange data. And these are the APIs. So it not only says that this is the format or this is a profile or so, it also tells you the way to make the connection. So the API format, the API signatures, everything has been standardized and given to us. And using that, we need to do the integration. Some of the risks that we feel remain are following, like data quality. Of course, it is always there. Just because we have moved to FHIR doesn't mean that I start sending suddenly a nice data quality data to you. It wouldn't happen. It won't really happen. But another one that is real-time availability, I will talk a little bit about that. And it is like this. So though we know I can make a query, I get a data back, and that's the way it is in terms of real-time, I get the data back. But making that data and the backend itself available in real time is something which is going to remain another risk anytime, because that is something which is slightly different ballgame than just exposing APIs to the external web. So making data available itself is something that we are talking here about, and not really worrying about whether I'll make a query and whether I'll get the data. Of course, I'll get it. But on the back end, I need to put in enough horsepower to ensure that the data is made available in real time. So I go sit in front of the doctor, and doctor makes notes, doctor writes on some medications, and now those medications are available to the API in real time. That is where it is. Legacy data migration, I think I kind of talked about it in one of the challenges earlier. So that risk will still remain, that when we are migrating or mapping data, we may be making few problems or few risk in there, mapping something wrong or so. But other than that, I mean, different API methodologies are fine, and full adoption will take 2 years. That's just a risk. I mean, we currently are talking about 2 years. COVID has given us, 6 months kind of pushback, or maybe I would say that it has eaten up 6 or 7 months. So that 2 years might become a little bit more. That's what I feel as a technologist. From the rule perspective, yes, 2022 seems to be the time to go. So that will still remain, because that risk will still remain, because we have been pushed ahead by 6 months due to this whole COVID. So full adoption might take a little bit more than that. That's the technologist point of view on the rule. From the applicability of the rule perspective, we really feel that it has brought in together all the three spectrum, that is the format of data exchange, the data modeling, and the way to exchange, that is making the API. So all the three have been defined, and that is something which actually excites us a lot. So anyway, Viet, back to you. This was just one slide comment from technologist point of view on the rule.
Thank you, Swanan. So we just want to, in this next part of the webinar, highlight a couple of the areas in the Cures Act related to certifications, as well as to highlight some of the data that will be available. There was a question around standard terminologies. So let's go ahead and jump into that. Next slide, please. So the certification has addressed the removal as well as revisions of a number of modules as part of the certification, and some of the modules were removed because the new modules and the use of US CDI and FHIR APIs kind of made them redundant. And that's important as we transition to using FHIR, and so that you are aware and can transmit data and receive data in standard formats. Some of the modules are maintained for another year or so, mainly to support the Medicaid programs. And then the revision of some of these modules was so that we can implement additional standards to improve in the interoperability. We won't dive into these, but they're here highlighted here so that you can be aware of them. So next slide, please. So there are a couple of really important new concepts that we want to highlight. The first is the US CDI, which stands for the United States Core Data for Interoperability. And we, in our next slide, we'll highlight some of the details of that, but it's an important aspect of evolving our ability and to use standardized data and to agree on how we use that data. It's a really essential part, and will be a foundational part, in my opinion, to the adoption of FHIR and just promotion of interoperability in general. The significant concept is the use of USCDI and transported using FHIR 4.0.1 resources. I've been working in interoperability for about 15 years and in FHIR for about 8, and it's really heartening to see FHIR being adopted in regulation, and everyone kind of agreeing that we're going to use this to exchange data. And a significant aspect of that, and what's been built into FHIR, is the ability to not only exchange individual patient data between patient and provider, or payer and patient, the various entities, but also the ability to share population data through things like bulk data, which will be very important as we look to try to address the goals of the triple aim and improving care for the population. As Swanan had mentioned, there's now security on authentication and authorization built into the standard as well. So you'll hear about SMART and SMART on FHIR and OpenID as mechanisms for establishing security and authorization. So by standardizing that, these are technologies that are already familiar to experienced web developers. This should speed up adoption. And then we have a number of privacy and security certifications through attestation. And then really the goal is to ultimately standardize the healthcare data in a structured way, in as much as possible, and then make that available through what we've they've coined the electronic health information, which this has come up before, doesn't change any of the privacy rules related to the information. It's just now EHI is even kind of broader than just healthcare information. Next slide, please. So this slide highlights some of the areas on the right-hand side. I know it's a little bit dense information, but for a developer, especially if you're relatively new to the health IT development, or you're in the space where you're developing technologies from scratch, it's really helpful to know that these are the data classes and ultimately data elements that you'll be able to extract from EHRs and other vendors with regard to FHIR and other standards. So many of these data elements and classes are represented by the US core profiles in FHIR. So things like the patient, vital signs, clinical notes, practitioner, allergies and intolerance. They're already defined as FHIR profiles, so you'll be able to get them through FHIR APIs. That's really a developers for information sharing in general. But in order to kind of do that, you have to also adopt FHIR Release 4, which is really great, and it kind of establishes the floor and where everyone's going to start. And as you all know, FHIR is kind of a living standard, and as gaps in FHIR are identified, or issues have been identified, or new use cases are identified, we develop implementation guides, we enhance the FHIR core standard, and then we publish it through the HL7 process with feedback from the community as well as testing. So next slide. So in order to certify, you have to meet a number of conditions and maintain them as part of certification. And these include issues around information blocking and how you've addressed exceptions, assurance to the secretary that you're not taking any actions that may be construed as information blocking. We have to be able to communicate effectively how we're using interoperability, security, user usability, and that's all to help improve in transparency. Certify that you're using the FHIR APIs or the other published APIs and exchanging US CDI. Real-world testing is essential, we all know, but the great benefit of FHIR is much of the testing is kind of built into FHIR through our test scripts and testing platforms. And so it's important to be aware of these conditions for initial certification and then maintenance of certification. So next slide, please. So now that we've kind of talked a little bit about some of the rules and how they can affect the HIT vendors, they might seem onerous, but they also provide opportunities. And so I'll hand it off to Swadan to talk about some of the enabling technologies that we can create via FHIR.
Thanks, Viet. And can I go to the next slide? Okay, so what we have been seeing so far was the rule and what's mandatory, what's new, and what has been around. We thought that we'll put together some sort of our point of view on what's beyond the certification, what's the value. We have talked about some of this, so I probably have talked about real time and scalability and whatnot. But let's look at let's look at it from a little bit near perspective. So real-time applications. What we feel is it's going to be a lot many people who will be probably coming up with their own applications, which are going to be third-party app developers, as we fondly refer to them. And there could be a plethora of mobile app, maybe a smarter FHIR app, which can be an extender of EHR. We'll be seeing a lot of that. And most of the use cases we believe that could be used for could be care coordination, monitoring, clinical decision support, and whatnot. The another one is it is based on sorry, another one is the healthcare process improvement. So what we're seeing is it's not just to use it for meeting the purpose of the rule, but also see if we can improve the healthcare process itself by sending real-time alerts, notifications, and whatnot. And I'll actually take an example here. So, and let's imagine that Swanand as a patient gets discharged from hospital, and hospital will be sending an editing notification probably because the notification has been made as part of ONC rule. But they can still send editing, they can still send file data, whatnot. But if the PC if my PCP correct had a small mobile app, and if I send an alert to that mobile app stating that what Swanand has been discharged from the hospital today, and within next 30 days you may want to go for another you may want to schedule another visit, right? And during that visit, you may want to take care of these 2-3 things. One of them could be do my medical reconciliation, check for my my blood pressure, or maybe check for my weight if it has reduced, increased, and whatnot. So that kind of alert can be sent across to my PCP, and then that way within 30 days the next visit really happens, because it's not just that I'm sending it from one app to another or one organization to another organization, but I'm actually sending it to my PCP to his handle as a real-time alert, and he will see, okay, I have to do this for someone. So that is more of a, we are thinking of process improvement, and you can actually nudge the other parties who are in the whole gamut of caregiving to actually act on certain things, depending upon, of course, certain protocol. The example I always look for protocols are clinical quality measures, the MIPS, MACRA of the world, or NCQ and HEDIS of the world. So depending upon some of those things, we can actually nudge around each other to do a better job of caregiving. Another thing is analytics and reporting. Yes, we spoke about it a little while earlier, that it is more suited for AI/ML systems as well, because it's a mostly defined JSON-based structure. We believe a lot of data could be used for AI/ML things, and then again coming up with insights of the data. Why we feel not just JSON is one part, but yes, the FHIR v4, correct? We believe if the data, the way it's going to get exchanged remains constant, the way you would define your AI/ML algorithms will be a lot more easier, and there would be again plethora of such such algorithms and apps based on such algorithms could be seen in the future. We firmly believe that this new standard that has come in terms of the data exchange would go much beyond just a certification, because if you only stick to certification, then we are only doing what has been mandated by the regulatory bodies to do, and we are not really reaping the benefits of what we should be doing. API-based architecture is the last one. Yes, the world is moving towards API-based data communication, and yes, we will see a lot many architectures which are API-based and real-time data exchange. Yeah, Arpit, can we go to the next slide? FHIR adoption approach, I'll spend a small, maybe like 2 minutes or maybe even less than that. So the way we feel it's going to happen, correct? The IT trends, these are influenced by the general healthcare trends. That's what we have been seeing. So, I mean, giving patients and clinician access to the relevant patient data, and at any point of time or any point of care is something that has been required. And for that, we feel again, FHIR is the standard that is going to cater to that thing really well. Integration of newer devices, not just applications, but also devices like wearables and stuff like that. All of that has been the constant demand from the healthcare trends. And yes, there will be a lot many technology enablers coming in. So we have web technologies here, we have IoTs around, we have event hubs and things like that that have been coming up. And of course, the last piece in the gamut is define the solution roadmaps. The way we see it's going to happen is the first thing that the technology enablers will be doing is to expose the data that they have to external world using FHIR APIs. That's the first thing that we see happening. The second thing is once everybody starts actually exposing the data to external world, then of course now you will start getting in as well external world, as FHIR data. So you would be having the next level of adoption would be to push that data into your ecosystem. And the next level would be to have your data model itself, which will cater to FHIR data that has been coming in. We have seen, in fact, that a lot many EHR companies and EMR companies have already, moved to FHIR-based data exchange. But yeah, ingest in FHIR has been low. But with this new rule, we feel that the second step also will be coming up much quicker. Can we go to the next slide? And this is how a quick schematic would look like, and I'll spend probably 30 seconds on this one. So on the left-hand side is your place from where you will get data. You would probably require a FHIR parser, and then your stores will be getting so many resources. So financial and clinical and operational, and there are many of them. The sources could be EHRs and trusted exchange networks that has been talked about in the rule, but not really specified. It will come sometime later. The devices and mobiles and whatnot. On the right hand side, again, the data delivery will be done to all of the same guys. So people would be sending alerts using FHIR, and there is FHIR gateway, which and a health system will expose. And again, there could be apps which are going to talk to health system using API Exchange Gateway, which is again a FHIR API one. This is a quick schematic, the way we feel data will be exchanged in future. But can we go to the next slide? Okay, so this is where we thought we'll make it a little bit more real, and how a mobile app requesting patient data would look like, and how data will actually flow. So underlying assumption out here is the consent has been in place, because the data exchange would require patient consent being around, and has been obtained by the data provider. So data provider could be a hospital, could be a payer, could be anybody in the healthcare fraternity. So we believe that, okay, so the first thing is consent has been around, and the resources for the consent and the policies have been assigned, and those are in place. The next thing that will happen is the third-party apps, maybe mobile or so, they'll make they'll try and make a connection with the third with the server, and say that, okay, I need Swan's data. And yes, once that has been made, then it will get an authentication token. Once authentication token is got in, the next thing is I'll request the data. Okay, give me this data. If the authentication token is not in place, what I will do is I'll redirect my the query to the authentication server. I'll say first go to the server, get the authentication token, and only then come back to me. I'll go to authentication server, I'll get it, and now come back to the API again, and I'll ask, okay, now I have the authentication token, get me the data. And this is where the next thing also chips in is the provider is not only going to look at what data I'm asking for which member I'm asking for. It's also going to look at whether that particular member has given me consent to check the data or not. And only if that has been in place, the data will be provided back, and then only it will be displayed. So it's going to be a little bit, going to be a little bit of back and forth. The 1 and 2 of the flow should be in place prior, but the rest of the things, that is getting token, going to authorization server, getting the token again, all of that, and then checking for the consent being there in the real time, correct? That is something which is going to be there. So consent check, that extra step is a new addition that we feel, not we feel, but it is actually the new addition that has happened to the entire API workflow and the data provision workflow. Can we go to the next slide? Atmik? Okay, so this is the another example we thought, and here we thought that we'll make use of a real life example. So just imagine that I'm a radiologist, and I'm looking at someone's imaging study, and I'm looking at the image in front of me, and I only see the image right now, and I probably see some amount of header data that's coming. But if this was a 2D echo, that I'm seeing. And if I were to figure out, okay, if the patient is obese, is the patient currently smoking, or was he, an earlier smoker? Are there any comorbidities that the patient already has? If I knew this information, that would actually make my interpretation much more solid. So what we thought is this is the way we can be done. So as a radiologist, I sit in front of my DICOM here because DICOM images I'm seeing. There is an image portion of it, and typically on the right hand side, I will be having patient's demographic appearing. And what we can also do is we can make a FHIR call to the underlying health system's EMR and say, okay, I want to query for whether patient was obese or not, whether patient was smoker or not. And all of those information will appear on the panel where I see patients patient demographics values as well. So in real time, I'm querying some of the aspects of patient's clinical history that I want to see to interpret the image that is in front of me in much better fashion. And this is the way we believe that ICOM viewers can actually change and can actually give a lot more information to the radiologist, correct, than just the image and than just the demographics of the patient. And this was the example that I talked about in the beginning of the event, that we will be looking at maybe one example, correct, which makes it really really cool. I believe it's really cool. I don't know about you folks, but I really feel it's cool, and it is something which is beyond the rules. So rule doesn't really say that you need to embed this data in DICOM here. Rule doesn't really say that what you want to do with the information, but we thought that we'll bring one example to everybody's notice, that yes, this is the way we can do it. And there are many more such examples that we can keep talking. But yeah, looking at the time, we probably had 10 more minutes left in the today's event. So Viet, I'll hand it over to you. And why don't you talk about the event that Da Vinci folks are doing next week?
Thank you very much. So we recognize for those who are relatively new to the FHIR landscape, the FHIR community, jumping in and trying to learn as much as you can be a bit daunting. And so as part of HL7's effort to support the community and educate implementers, we've organized an event next week, and registration is still open, that will be featuring a number of implementation guides from Da Vinci as well as the Karen Alliance. For those unfamiliar, Da Vinci and Karen are two of a number of FHIR accelerators, and our goal is to bring a community together. In Da Vinci's case, it's payers, providers, and vendors to look at different important high-value workflows and then develop implementation guides to them. And you can think of an implementation guide as really a recipe or a standard operating procedure for assembling the ingredients that FHIR provides, the resources, profiles, and operations, and then putting them into a workflow. And so next week, we will be having an education event that starts on Tuesday with an opening session with ONC, as well as folks from CMS who are the authors of the rules, as well as the Burden Reduction Office and the CCSQ, which is works on quality measures. Then we'll jump into some basic FHIR education Tuesday afternoon, followed by a number of tutorials on Wednesday around the Da Vinci and Karen implementation guides. So you'll get an overview of each of those guides. And then on Thursday, we'll be doing kind of a mini connect-a-thon or implementation event. So for those unfamiliar with what happens around FHIR connect-a-thons, or want to know more about some of the reference implementations that have been built around the implementation guides, you'll be able to have kind of hands-on experience and a Q&A with the implementation guide authors and use case leads, as well as the reference implementation developers. So this is a really great event to learn more about FHIR, to see how these Da Vinci implementation guides and Karen guides actually have been highlighted in the rules themselves, particularly the CMS rules, and then how you can learn more about how FHIR works. So we want to invite you to register and participate in this event. We think it's going to be very, very educational, and we plan to continue these kind of implementer focused events in the coming year. So as we finish off this kind of didactic part of our webinar, we want to post one more poll, which is kind of a general poll, but hopefully it'll help us with the Q&A part. But the question really is, what is the biggest challenge that you see in healthcare IT today? So Sanada, if you wouldn't mind posting that, we'll give folks a little time to ask the question. And if you have questions based on our presentation today, or just other questions around FHIR, HL7, Vinci, technologies around CitiusTech, please post your question in the question box. We have 2 leading answers from this
Yeah.
query, clearly.
Those have been leading for quite some time. We know that. Yes.
So the first 2 answers are coming out to be, the first one is about 34, 35%, and the second one is over 50%. And we really do recognize that data quality, data mapping, and management are significant challenges in healthcare. We have a lot of legacy systems, and some of those legacy systems, if they are part of meeting the rule, will need some mapping work, which is challenging. But once that work is done, the ability to share the data using FHIR, the friction of that should be dramatically reduced. The issue around multiple standards is also an issue. I guess the one question is the notion of multiple standards in terms of exchange standards, as well as multiple standards in terms of the terminologies. So we recognize that version 2 is in widespread implementation, and it will be continued to be used for the foreseeable future. And there are FHIR implementation guides to support that we have a V2 to FHIR implementation guide, as well as we know that CDA and the CCDA IGs are out there in production. And so there are aspects of FHIR to help support CDA as well. And so I see FHIR as being able to support the past as well as moving us into the future. So let's go ahead and hop into some of our questions. Let's see here. What are the ONC certification options for individuals, if applicable? I'm not sure I understand the question. I think the certification is primarily around if you're developing technologies. So if you're an individual company, and you want to get certified, you'd still need to meet the same criteria, in my best estimation. The second question we get all the time, which is, where's the best place to learn more about FHIR? I think my answer to that is always primarily look at all the resources that are available through HL7. Sanana can help point you to, but if you go to hl7.org, we have a link to our education portal. We have a number of courses that are both synchronous and asynchronous. We have a FHIR fundamentals course that is a 4-week-long kind of hands-on approach. And I think the challenge is kind of 3 levels, in my opinion. You have to learn basic FHIR and the core components of being able to talk about profiles and resources and APIs and the FHIR operations. And then once you have those kind of core understanding, you can then extend it to things like Smart on FHIR and CDS hooks. And then from there, once you understand the ingredients, those implementation guides will then make more sense, because it requires an understanding of how profiles work and the terminologies binding to them. So I recommend going to HL7 and getting education. There are others, vendors in the community that are also providing education as well. And of course, come to our event. That's a great place to learn more about FHIR. it is a journey, and it does take time to kind of wrap your head around the terms we use and putting it all together. But we hope that becomes clearer. And then once you actually know about FHIR and you work with your development team, I'm assuming this is an analyst, but that's probably not a great assumption. As you're developing technologies and you want to test them, then we invite you to come to Connectathons and really test it out with others, and it's a great place to learn more about the nitty-gritty of FHIR. Okay, let's see. Will FHIR data providers be expected to retroactively upgrade their FHIR data as standards evolve? So I'm going to have to defer that question because I don't know. Swanan, do you have an opinion on that question?
I mean, honestly speaking, it is more like it is what it is kind of answer and nothing else. So yeah, the standards once when they change, yes, we got to make changes, but we have seen a lot of that happening since DSA 234, but I think this one is here to stay for some more time. So we may not really get into this problem anytime soon, is what I believe personally.
So we have only a couple more minutes, actually, just about another minute. Let me answer one of these questions, which I think is really good, which is the key issue is not about the technologies, but a willingness to change and collaborate and the dominance of large systems. And I will wholeheartedly agree that the technology is only one aspect of kind of transforming our healthcare system. All the major EHR vendors are on board and have roadmaps for their adoption of FHIR. The rules place some requirements for them to adopt FHIR, but that's just the technology part. Every organization that implements healthcare IT technologies needs to understand how it fits into their strategic goals for patient care or otherwise. So I apologize. I think we're running out of time to answer the remainder of these, but we'll try to capture them and answer them and reply to the questioner. So I'll hand it back to you, Sadhana, unless Swanan, you have any additional comments.
No, not really. Sadhana, over to you.
Thank you so much, Swanand and Viet. Very informative session. Thanks to all of you for your interesting questions. We hope to see you in one of our future events or classes. Till we meet again. Bye, everyone. Bye, Viet. Bye, Swanand.
Thank you. Thank you all for participating in our webinar today.
Thanks, everybody.